in a kingdom where shadows clung to every corner and the air was thick with whispers of dark magic, Snow White's tale began not with a mirror's simple question, but with a prophecy. The queen, a sorceress deeply versed in the darkest arts, was forewarned by her enchanted mirror. One shall come, fairer than thee, to rend thy beauty and usurp thy throne. Snow White was born under a blood moon, a harbinger of misfortune. Her skin was pale as alabaster, lips red as freshly spilled blood, and hair as black as the raven's wing. The birth was not a cause for celebration, but a grim event marked by death and despair. Her mother, once a beacon of light in the darkened kingdom, died in agony, her final screams echoing through the castle halls. The infant's cries were the only sound that followed, a chilling reminder of the life that had been taken to bring her into the world. Her father, a king who had long lost his way in the labyrinth of his own despair, remarried a woman of incomparable beauty. This new queen's beauty was not her own, but a stolen gift, maintained by sinister means. A pact made with forces that dwelled in the shadows. The queen's beauty was a facade, a mask to hide the monstrous depths of her soul. As Snow White grew, the queen's jealousy twisted into an obsessive rage. She was not just threatened by Snow White's beauty, but by the power she sensed within the girl, a power that could challenge her own. The Queen's Grimoire, a tome bound in human skin and inked in blood, spoke of a power born under the blood moon, a power that could either save or destroy. The mirror's forewarning became an ever-present thorn, and the Queen's mind, once sharp and calculating, spiraled into madness. Her once grand palace, filled with opulence and splendor, became a mausoleum of horrors. The walls wept with blood, and the corridors echoed with the cries of those who had crossed the Queen. The castle was alive with dark magic, a reflection of the Queen's decaying sanity. One cold winter's night, she summoned her huntsman, a man who had long since lost his soul to the Queen's dark charms. His heart was as cold as his mistress's, hardened by years of committing unspeakable acts in her name. "Take Snow White into the forest," she commanded, her voice a chilling whisper that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. "Bring me her heart, still warm." The huntsman led Snow White deep into the dark forest, a place where the trees whispered of ancient evils and the ground was stained with the blood of the lost. The forest was alive with dark magic, a twisted reflection of the Queen's soul. But when the moment came, his hand faltered. He couldn't bring himself to harm her. The darkness in the forest seemed to retreat from her, as if even the malevolent forces that dwelled there recognized something greater within her. Snow White, sensing his hesitation, pleaded for her life, her voice filled with a purity that cut through the darkness like a blade. The huntsman, overcome by a fleeting moment of mercy, let her go. Instead, he returned to the Queen with a deer's heart, hoping it would suffice. The heart, still dripping with blood, was placed in a blackened chest, its beat echoing through the silent castle like a drum heralding the arrival of doom. Lost and frightened, Snow White stumbled upon a small, decrepit cottage. The 7 dwarfs who lived there were no merry miners, but ancient, twisted creatures bound to the forest by a curse. Their eyes gleamed with an eerie light, and their voices were like the rustling of dead leaves. They took her in, drawn not by her innocence, but by the power they sensed within her. Their twisted forms were a reminder of the price of dark magic, a price Snow White was unaware she had begun to pay. Snow White lived with the dwarfs, oblivious to their true nature. They protected her, though not out of kindness, but to shield her from the Queen's relentless wrath. They too feared the Queen's dark power, a power that had cursed them to their wretched existence. Each day Snow White's beauty grew, and with it her latent power, a power that even the ancient dwarfs feared. The Queen, discovering the huntsman's deception, flew into a rage that shook the very foundations of her castle. She delved deeper into her dark arts, her once beautiful features contorting with each spell she cast. The mirror, once a simple reflection of her vanity, now became a portal to darker realms, where she sought the guidance of ancient and malevolent spirits. Her first attempt on Snow White's life came in the form of a cursed comb, a relic from an age long forgotten. Disguised as a peddler woman, the Queen offered the comb to Snow White, her voice sweet with deception. But as soon as the comb touched Snow White's hair, it sank into her scalp like a serpent, its venomous bite sending her into a death-like sleep. The dwarfs, using their ancient magic, revived her, but not without a cost. A sliver of darkness now lurked within Snow White, a shadow that had not been there before. Undeterred, the Queen tried again with a poisoned corset, a garment laced with the souls of the damned. The dwarf saved Snow White once more, but each time, the darkness within her grew, feeding off the Queen's malevolent intent. The forest around the cottage began to wither, its trees dying as Snow White's innocence was slowly corrupted. Enraged beyond reason, the Queen concocted her most diabolical plan yet: a poisoned apple, a fruit grown in the depths of the underworld and soaked in the blood of the innocent. Disguising herself as an old crone, she approached the cottage, her twisted soul barely contained within her frail form. The apple, gleaming with unnatural light, was offered to Snow White, who, despite the warnings of the dwarfs, took a bite. As soon as the apple touched her lips, Snow White fell to the ground lifeless. But this time, there was no awakening. The dwarfs, powerless against the dark magic that had claimed her, placed her in a glass coffin, hoping to preserve her body from decay. But even in death, Snow White's power grew, a dark and terrible force that seeped into the land, turning it barren and lifeless. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months, and still Snow White lay in her glass coffin, her beauty undiminished, her body unchanging. The kingdom fell into ruin, its people plagued by nightmares and haunted by the whispers of the dead. The Queen, believing herself victorious, basked in her triumph. But her victory was hollow, for the mirror no longer spoke to her. It remained silent, a reflection of her empty soul. One day, a prince, drawn by tales of the beautiful maiden in the glass coffin, arrived. But he was no noble hero. He was a man driven by desire, drawn not by love, but by the promise of power. He was captivated by her beauty, a beauty that hinted at the power she possessed. He insisted on taking her to his castle, believing that his possession of her would grant him dominion over the dark forces that had claimed her. As the coffin was being moved, a piece of the poisoned apple dislodged from her throat, and Snow White awoke. But she was no longer the innocent girl who had once fled the Queen's wrath. The poison had seeped into her soul, darkening her heart and awakening the power that had lain dormant within her. She returned to the castle, not as a gentle, loving princess, but as a cold and vengeful queen. Her beauty now a mask for the darkness within. Her first act was to confront her stepmother. The queen, upon seeing Snow White alive and well, felt her heart turn to ice. She fled to her throne room, invoking ancient spells to protect herself. But Snow White, now wielding the dark magic she had absorbed from the poison, was unstoppable. The two sorceresses clashed in a battle that shook the very heavens, but in the end, Snow White was victorious. She overpowered the queen, forcing her to dance in the red-hot iron shoes, a punishment that would have been merciful compared to what Snow White had planned. But instead of dying, the queen's spirit was trapped in the mirror, condemned to an eternity of reflecting her own twisted visage. The mirror, now a prison, became a gateway to realms of torment, where the queen's soul would be eternally tortured by the horrors she had once inflicted upon others. Snow White took the throne, her beauty untouched, but her heart forever darkened. The kingdom, once filled with light and laughter, fell under a shroud of fear and darkness. The land withered, its people enslaved by the Dark Queen's will. The dwarfs, their curse bound to Snow White's fate, remained in the forest, their twisted forms a constant reminder of the price of dark magic. They watched in horror as Snow White, once their ward, now wielded the power of the darkness that had consumed her. The prince, realizing too late the change in Snow White, tried to flee, but she imprisoned him, turning him into her unwilling consort. His love, once pure, became twisted by the dark magic that now bound him to her. He became a shadow of his former self, a puppet dancing to the strings of the Dark Queen. The castle became a place of nightmares, where shadows whispered of a once pure princess consumed by darkness, and the halls echoed with the cries of those who dared to defy the queen. And thus, the tale of Snow White ended not in happiness, but in a dark reign of terror, a cautionary tale of beauty, envy, and the corrupting power of dark magic. The mirror, now holding the queen's tortured soul, became a silent witness to the endless night that had fallen upon the land. The kingdom, once a beacon of hope, became a place of despair where the sun never shone, and the rivers ran black with the tears of the damned. The prophecy had been fulfilled, but at a cost far greater than anyone could have foreseen. Snow White had indeed become the fairest of them all, but in her fairness lay a darkness that consumed everything it touched. The once beloved princess had become a dark queen, her beauty a weapon, her heart a void where no light could ever reach. In the end, there were no heroes, only victims of a prophecy that had doomed them all to a fate worse than death. The story of Snow White, once a tale of innocence and beauty, had become a legend of darkness and despair, a reminder that even the purest of hearts can be corrupted by the shadows that lurk within us all. If you enjoyed this dark twist on a classic fairy tale, make sure to subscribe to Twilight Fables for more haunting stories like this one. There's always another tale waiting to be told, and you won't want to miss it. Until next time, beware the darkness. It might just be closer than you think.